Hi, this is the Option Talk series, and tonight we have a special guest, Laura. Shit, I already. And please include that. Please include that. I'll give you a 5-second buffer for that too. Yeah, man, oh man. Okay. All right, try again. Hi everyone. It's Tuesday here, and I'm in Austria, but it's going to be Monday, November 22nd, when this goes out live, and I'm talking to Lauren Sarah Hayes, musician from Scotland, teaching in the U.S. right now, and we're going to cover a bunch of topics related to Lauren's work and history and creative practice. The show will be broadcast as it is now on November 22nd, and Lauren will be on the chat. So even though this interview is going to be pre-recorded right now, definitely ask questions in the chat. Lauren will be there to answer them during the broadcast on November 22nd. So we just want to have that clear with the time difference and me on tour, etc. Lauren was kind enough to get together and talk to me on Tuesday, a week before the actual broadcast. So Lauren, thank you very much for being on the Option Talk show. Much appreciated, and it's taken a while to set this up, so your patience has been super appreciated.
Great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, and I know you've created 3 pieces for us on the program and I wanted to, we'll talk about each of those. But before we dive into the music you sent, I wanted to talk a little bit, get a little bit of background. I know you're based out of Scotland, and now you're teaching in the U.S., and that's already a lot right there. Can you talk a little bit of how you got into the kind of music you're working on with electronics and also prepare piano, so electric acoustic music? How did you get there, and how did you get to where you are right now?
That's a huge question. Yeah. So it started when I was very young, growing up in a musical household, always playing music with family and friends, and I trained on classical piano. But throughout my youth, I was in various bands. I was playing in punk and ska bands, doing loads and loads of gigs. And then a friend of mine at university went off to China and left me with a load of equipment. So synthesizers, a laptop with software, drum machines, samplers. And I started sort of experimenting with this hardware, not really knowing what I was doing, but kind of really enjoying the explorations that I was coming up with. And then I just, I'd worked freelance for many years as a musician, playing piano with singer-songwriters, being in all these bands. And I found a master's in digital composition and performance, which was the first time I thought about using code for music creation and building my own instruments, and started doing this, and something just really clicked for me. It was a way to kind of develop the types of musical explorations and incorporate improvisations in ways that I found really exciting. And that was 2007, and this is what I've been doing ever since. So developing very personalized instruments that are based around my own body, the way I express music as a pianist through my hands, but then thinking about physicality in digital instruments. So it's been this kind of ongoing 14-year development of how do I use technology to create instruments for improvisation and exploring.
Okay, so you're talking a lot about like interface between the actual coding on like laptop software, etc. So you're working on that, but you're also working on an interface. And when you talk about touch and physicality, and that's a really interesting thing for me I want to know more about that part of it, because I've worked with a lot of people who play a laptop as an instrument in improvised music context. And one thing that always is a challenge is in performance. Lots of people work with laptop computers, even if they're not musicians. And the aspect of acoustic instruments you have to create the sound, whether it's like percussion or a wind instrument or a piano, etc. And there's a direct physical visual correlation between the way a sound is made and the physical gesture connected to that sound, even if it's not always one-to-one relationships, like let's say hitting a drum. So can you talk a little bit about your thought connected to this physicality of creating sound with something that doesn't respond in an acoustic way, like the laptop.
Absolutely. And this was actually what I was researching when I went on to do a PhD in this. So when I started performing with laptops, being someone who was used to playing the piano and guitar and being in these really loud bands where the music vibrates and resonates, and using that to be expressive, and then coming to the laptop where firstly it doesn't vibrate, so there's none of that physical feedback, right? Which I guess if you play acoustic instruments, you're maybe not aware of how much we use that when we're playing, but it's so integral to how we express music. So firstly, the laptop doesn't vibrate, but then also thinking about effort within instrumental playing, like it takes time to find our way around it. The piano is this huge, cumbersome instrument. You have to practice scales for years and sort of develop your sense of expression through your physicality. So my approach to working with laptops and code was thinking about these two aspects of digital sound and making them physical. Firstly, allowing the instruments to resonate. And I did a lot of research into haptic technology. So I was actually placing vibration motors on my body to allow me to feel the digital sound the way you would with an acoustic instrument. And this was like many years of research. I'm still working on this, but expanding it into working with people with cochlear implants to explore music perception through haptics. So the technology always expands into all these different areas. But as a performer, as soon as I started feeling the digital sound in my body, it just felt so connected for me because I missed that from coming from acoustic instruments. And then also thinking about, how to build in that sense of performance and struggle and effort and make it feel that I was actually creating that music through those kind of physical resistances that acoustic instruments afford. And, I always say for someone who maybe grew up playing music only on a laptop or iPad, they might not miss that sense of struggle, but because I played the piano for so many years, I really felt that it was missing. So I worked with all these various force feedback controllers. The thing that has stuck is that I play a PS2 game controller. And I started doing this in 2007. It was a suggestion of one of my tutors and it stuck. So that's what I perform with. You'll see in the video. And it's a kind of ecosystem that I've created where I can, find my way through what I'm setting up digitally, but it's got these kind of physical navigations and resistances and boundaries the same way that acoustic instruments have. Like we enjoy these moments of fragility where there's things that might just break in a multiphonic, for example, or finding the edges. And I guess also because I play the piano, using my hands and fingers is the main way that I express music through touch. The game controller is just kind of stuck for me. So that was my approaches to physicality and electronic sound.
Okay, that's fantastic. And with a game controller, is that, because I don't understand this technology super well, so that's the interface with the code stuff you're doing on the PC and whatnot. So this is like a triggering device that you can channel activity through in a physical way through the work you're doing in a digital way. Is that right?
Yeah, but what I'm trying to get to is essentially to think more of an ecosystem. So I use voice processors, I use drum machines, I use analog synths, then this code that I've been involving in Max MSP for 14 years. So it's sort of at the point where it's designed so that everything, it's quite cybernetic, everything feeds into each other. It's like a dynamic system. So yes, I'm sort of controlling it, but that word control I think is quite problematic. Like I don't control the piano, so I'm not trying to control this instrument. I'm trying to create a space that I can play and explore and improvise within, and a lot of it's highly unpredictable and quite difficult to play, which sometimes I regret when I'm on stage. But that's as an improviser, that's what I enjoy, and that's why I enjoy collaborating with other people, or playing in unusual spaces as well. All these elements of unpredictability are coming into the system, and that's how I'm designing the instrument.
So are you saying in a way that if you use the word ecosystem, you sort of got this interface between all these different components in this ecosystem. You set this in motion, and then or activate aspects of it, and then you interface with it and kind of, as you say, play in it, as opposed to quote unquote control it. You're like setting something in motion and then dealing with what comes back at you. Is that right?
Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Okay. Well, let's take a listen to the first piece you sent, and maybe you could point out an example in the piece of what's going on that we just talked about, like how that ecosystem might be interfaced with what in this piece. All right, everybody, in this very artificial way of doing a live interview, which isn't live, I'm Ken Vandermark, and this is the Option Talk series on Experimental Sound Studios quarantine concert broadcasting, which takes place every Monday night for Option. And our special guest today is Lauren Sarah Hayes. We just watched the first piece of the program. And I want to remind everyone, even though this conversation is pre-recorded, Lauren will be live on Monday, November 22nd, when the show is broadcast, and we'll be happy to answer questions from the chat. So please, any questions you've got about the music, about the work, about the discussion, put them there, and Lauren will be live. I will be asleep because I'm in Europe right now, and it'll be very, very, very early in the morning for me, so I won't be here. But I'm here now, and we've been talking about interface, creating ecosystems, and a bunch of really interesting ideas. And I wanted to jump off to a couple of things that you talked about in some of the research I did for this discussion. And one thing was, you mentioned something interesting in a paper that you wrote about, and I don't want to put any words in, I'm just paraphrasing here, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but the idea of being an improviser, being interested in improvisation, starting off as a quote unquote novice, and then becoming quote unquote an expert, and you having sort of issues with that idea that you become an expert at technique, let's say, and then that frees you up to not, to have, let's say, more room to improvise or become quote unquote an expert. Can you talk a little bit about, I mean, I don't want to say issues as like an antagonism, but why you're challenged, why you want to challenge that concept, if I could say that.
Yeah, and I've been through the years of playing in improv orchestras. So I played in one in Edinburgh called Edimpro for years, and it was where I learned to be an improviser. And of course, it takes years, particularly. I mean, being trained on piano classically, but then also being in bands and punk. So I wasn't sort of tied to any particular mode of playing, but I certainly didn't come from a jazz background. So going into an improv ensemble, it was really trying to figure out, how do I fit in within this as a pianist, using extended techniques, and it just taking many, many years to learn the practice of improvisation as it does. And that was really crucial for me, and the same within my electronic performance as well. I guess I used to call myself a composer. I haven't for many years, but I was creating pieces and trying to find meaning within what I was doing, which again took many years, right? I mean, it's quite easy to prototype something, but for it to feel meaningful to you as the creator and the performer, for me, took quite a while. But then I think from teaching, and I'm in a really interdisciplinary department, so I'm not in a music department. I'm in a department with engineers and people with backgrounds in dance and movement practices and theatre and fiction and all kinds of really interesting ideas. So a lot of my students are interested in many, many different things. And when I started teaching improvisation, I had to think about how can I teach this in a way that people who don't have musical backgrounds can approach it. And what I found was by using DIY technologies or by allowing the students to kind of bring their existing skills in different areas, but using the practices of improvisation, like using stuff from Search and Reflect, or using like all the exercises that I'd done when I was learning to be an improviser, which I kind of hate, but like after you do them, you're changed as an improviser, like all these improvisation games. And I was, so lucky when I was starting out to be involved in workshops with people like Anne LaBerge and Fred Frith, and, just learning different kind of approaches and games and practices. But what I found with the students is that very quickly, they could be producing like highly engaging, highly expressive, creative improvisations that were not dependent on having instrumental skill in that sense. So I'm certainly not throwing out the importance of instrumental training and that we can become expert in it. But I think from working in an interdisciplinary way and working with technology, just allowing that conversation to open up. And this also came from, in the UK, I did work for many years with arts charities, creating expressive musical systems for people with disabilities and learning difficulties. And again, they're figuring out that, to create something that's highly expressive doesn't need to fit within that model. So yeah, that paper that you're referring to, Beyond Skill Acquisition, it's sort of just poking at that and saying there's many, many different approaches we can have here. And there's lots of discussions around what is free improvisation now, what does it mean? What does it mean to be democratic, which is just sort of really problematic. And I think I'm trying to sort of, just problematize that discussion a little bit from what I've seen from working with different groups.
Can you talk a little bit, like when you say with the students and you're creating means for them to generate creative improvising situations without having like spent the years of work you're talking about, And I think that indirectly you raise a point about the sensibility that, I put the time in, therefore I'm qualified. You know what I'm saying? That doesn't necessarily mean that just because you put time in that you're qualified, A, or that you're actually good at what you do, B. I mean, that's true of someone who fixes cars too. They may have spent a long time fixing cars and they don't do a very good job at it. So, I mean, it raises some good points about like what being creative is, how to be creative. With your students that haven't, let's say, had this long period of working through a process like that, what means do you give them to try to generate these improvising situations that you're talking about? Like what works for that?
Yeah, let's think of an example. I mean, even taking something like John Stevens' click piece, right? I mean, anyone can produce a click, and we can use any equipment, found objects, instruments. They're encouraged to bring instruments if they play them. It could be something on a laptop, it could be from your phone. But then also that can translate into movement as well, or a click could be something visual as well. So it's sort of saying, like, here's a framework that we can try to explore in, and then bring in your interests and your skill sets and your, like, how do you engage with the world, basically? Like, how do you skillfully move through the world in a creative way, and what does that look like for you? And then let's use improvisation to kind of realize that. So like, that's a really simple example. And then afterwards we'll discuss, was that successful? Was it not? Why was it not? Like, let's develop the vocabulary to talk about this. And they can recognize, like, that one was really boring because we all just threw away our clicks like instantly, and it didn't have any form or structure. So then starting to talk about, like, what does form look like, what does structure, what does evolution look like over time, and sort of building it out that way. So
so reducing the technical skill part, and so everyone's kind of in the same playing field, so to speak. So it's not about technique, it's about the idea, about listening and interacting and focusing on that improvisational space, and reducing the technique aspect a little bit to make it more equitable, so to speak.
But then some of them will, become highly skillful, or some of them will already play instruments, or some of them, they always want to use games in improvisation. So some of them will be gamers that will incorporate gaming somehow into it. And their expertise in that kind of stuff is way beyond mine. I just facilitate it. And so it's super exciting. And, last year we had to do this on Zoom, and there was a piece where they were all using cooking and food and the sounds of food, and you have this video of all this amazing stuff being made, and it was beautiful. So it's always super impressive what they do. But so it's certainly not creating a binary between skill and technique and the other, but it's kind of just playing within this and
raising questions, which is beautiful, which is really beautiful. Well, speaking of technique and the piano, and the fact that earlier you were talking about being conservatory trained in the piano, etc. The second piece that you've got for us it uses the piano as well. It's like an electroacoustic piece on some level. Could you talk a little bit about the interface of that world within your work?
Yeah. So again, I guess concurrently when I started playing with hybrid analog digital electronics, I was also picking up, in Scotland, it's very easy to get these free pianos from people that don't want them anymore, that give them away on Craigslist. So I was sort of collecting these battered pianos and experimenting with preparing them in various ways and then augmenting them digitally with electronics. And in the piece, I'm using actually this really cheap controller called a game track controller, which was designed for playing PC golf. Because it basically, you wear two gloves and it tethers your hands to these sort of two pieces of string, essentially. And it's a really cheap way. These things are $5 on eBay. It's a really cheap way to get XYZ position data from your hands. And what I'm doing in this improvisation, it's again creating this sort of play space, but it's very much tied towards where I am on the piano, the way that my body and hands are moving. I'm super interested in kind of lo-fi tech, in the sense that I'm not trying to get accurate positions of my hands and more data. I'm sort of looking at, here's a way to hook this up. Let's play with the noise in the system. Let's play with we'll do some pitch tracking. We'll analyze how the dynamic range of what I'm playing, but just use the noisiness of those processes. I'm not going for accuracy, again, as a sort of improvisation partner to then process the acoustic sound and trigger other sorts of processes. So again, it's a sort of very noisy ecosystem, but it's really tied to my sort of physicality and movement within the playing as well. So putting this physical space next to this digital space and finding interesting points where these things can align. Because I agree with what you said earlier, and people have always sort of commented that to me when I'm improvising in groups, that I don't want to draw distinctions between who's had instrumental training and who hasn't. In a way, it's not so important. I teach a lot of people that haven't, and they're doing highly creative things. But I think because I came from that world, that type of expression is something I've tried to put into my individual systems. So.
Okay. Well, we're going to listen to the second piece now. Again, this is Laura and Sarah Hayes. Thanks so much for being here, talking with me. I'm Ken Vandermark. This is the Option Talk series on ESS, and we'll be back in just after this piece. Again, Lauren Sarah Hayes with me, and we're going to hear some more music from Lauren at the end of the show. One more time, this is a pre-recorded interview, but Lauren will be on the live chat on Monday, November 22nd, when this Option Talks broadcast takes place. So please tune in. Please ask questions. Lauren's been very generous about wanting to answer those questions in real time. And the last stretch of questions, speaking of which, I'm really curious about this idea in some of the research I did about site-specific and site-responsive work. Those concepts already are really provocative in a super exciting way to me. And I wanted to see if you could talk a little bit about how you think about those, how they may be similar or different. But again, like site-specific, site-responsive work and what you do with those things.
So this whole idea for me came about from every gig I did, every concert was just in very different spaces, and a lot of people in a sort of more, I guess, traditional electroacoustic practice, there's a kind of school of thought that's trying to tame the space or find the sweet spot in the space or have this sort of idealized listening position. And I play in concert halls, but I play in DIY venues, I play in people's gardens, yards, I played in music festivals with very unusual spaces. So I sort of realized that this is something I want to use as an improviser rather than trying to tame and control. Again, it comes back to this sense of exploration and play rather than control for me. And all musicians, we all make use of the space when we're performing. We all respond to it similarly to the resonance of our instruments. But yeah, I really tried to think about how can I make this part of what I do as an improviser. So I did this, I started then kind of seeking out interesting acoustic spaces to perform in. I did 4 solo performances for Sonica Festival in Scotland in Hamilton Mausoleum, which used to have the record for the longest echo of any man-made structure. Another like these oil tunnels in Scotland recently beat that record, but it has this 15-second echo.
Wow.
So I did these performances there, which was actually incredibly difficult because the building has this very colorful history, which you can look up, which like relates to mummification and sarcophaguses and crypts and all this stuff. But it also has this history of like the building was starting to sink because of mining in the area. So I didn't get a lot of time in this space to experiment in it. And of course, like my music's very sort of frenetic and kind of throws out lots of different beats and things. And in that space, everything was just resonating, and it was really wild. And like similarly, performing at Norberg Electronic Music Festival, which is this little village in Sweden where it was an old mining town, and they used the old mining structures to create this amazing festival. And again, like the vibrations in this huge concrete mining structure were just making every sound sort of resonate for like seconds. So playing a lot with that. And then, yeah, I kind of got interested in thinking more about site and location in different ways. So thinking about this sort of relates to like a lot of the kind of theoretical stuff that informs my ideas, kind of biological systems and dynamic systems and philosophy of mind and theories of embodiment. So thinking about how the environment could factor in. And I started doing a lot of site responsive sound installation work where I'm using environmental sensors to think about the relationship between sound and the environment in a variety of ways. And this is also something that I teach. But I think as an improviser, it's again just another factor. Collaborators, people you play with, the space, the equipment you use, the materials that we work with that can give this kind of unpredictability or allow us to be responsive to our environment. And I'm just thinking about it quite literally in that way. But I think it's something that all improvisers use and I think find exciting as much as I do. I think that's something that I really enjoy. So whether I'm doing solo improvisation where I'm responding to audiences and the venue and the sound system and the space that I'm in, or working with new collaborators, is all about being responsive to this specific set of conditions. And that's what I find really exciting.
Mm-hmm. And you're right, that's exactly what improvisers do, whether they are is like conceptually cognizant of it as you are when you think about it as part of your practice, or they just respond intuitively. I mean, you're dealing with the space, you're dealing with who you're playing with, the situation with your instrument that day, acoustics, everything. The music that you've sent over is solo material, different kinds of solo material. And I just wanted, before we hear the last piece and conclude the show with some more music from you, I wanted to see if you could talk just a little bit about collaborating. And because you brought it up a number of times, how it's really important to you. How do you approach that, or how does it impact your work? Why is collaboration so important?
Firstly, I just enjoy playing with people, meeting new people. I love playing with people that I've never performed with before. In fact, the last time I was in Chicago, I did something at Elastic Arts, and it was just, finding other improvisers who would be curious to set up. I enjoy sort of these events where there's maybe some solo performances and then duos, trios, these kind of things. I also learned so much about my own practice and my instrument through collaboration. Even though I've had this setup sort of evolving for like over a decade, every time I play with someone new, I find new things, I discover new things within it. So from that perspective, it's always super fruitful. Also I sort of enjoy the ways that we can kind of forget about genre through collaboration. Like I'm thinking of I don't know if you know Martin Green and Lau, who are sort of experimental folk bands in the UK. They set up this thing which was bringing together folk musicians who were improvisers and electronic musicians who were improvisers to do these kind of very rapid, like we meet for an hour and then do a show, and just working with different types of musicians, but using improvisation as a kind of common way to work together. I just find like I just love doing that because it kind of always expands the horizons in which I'm working. And I think that's what I found from like being in bands, that having to create in a particular way was always quite limiting in a sense. So I think through collaborations, particularly people from different areas of music, can just lead to super exciting things. And then of course that kind of reflexively like feeds back on how you play and how you create and so on. So and I think also just with COVID and doing a lot of live streams, it's just been really nice to set up some things. I've been playing with Geo, the Glasgow Improvisers Orchestra, Raymond McDonald and all those people, and it's just been really lovely to have a kind of connection in that way. So
yeah, I hear you. It's I mean, there's something about playing with people, for people, that you can't replace. It's a super important way of making music. So Lauren, I really want to thank you for being here. Everybody, Lauren Sarah Hayes. We're going to conclude with a little bit more of your music. Thanks so much for creating the pieces for the Option Talks program. This will be broadcast live Monday, November 22nd. Lauren will be in the chat, so if you've got questions, comments, curiosities, etc., please put them in there. And Lauren's been very gracious to be live with that and answer as many of those questions as possible. Thanks so much for spending the time, for the music, for the inspiring talk. It's been really wonderful. Thank you.
It's been a pleasure chatting with you. Thanks so much.
Okay. And I hope to see you in person soon.
Yeah, I hope so.
Beautiful. Okay, thanks, Lauren. Thank you so much.
Great.